Hi, everyone. Welcome to the SoDA Series Live. I'm Tom Beck. I'm Executive Director of SoDA. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you. For those that don't know, the SoDA Series Live is a collaboration between SoDA and the Adobe Strategic Development Team. Every month we host conversations with design leaders around the world, and we dig into how they got into the business, what areas they're focused on today, how they stay relevant and inspired. We've been doing this now for almost 4 years, and just thrilled to keep this train rolling. Today, we are going to chat with Tim Murphy, but first I would like to introduce Talon Wadsworth. Talon is a principal designer at Adobe, and he is the MC and leader of these conversations. So, Kendall, if you can bring Talon on. Oh yeah, there you are.
Hey, Tom.
Hey, Talon, it's good to see you.
Great to see you. I was really enjoying seeing you in person for like a subsequent month. So that was.
I know,
now
yeah.
we're back.
So it was amazing. I mean, for all of you on the on the live stream, I'm sure you can empathize. You have these relationships, especially ones that you've built over the last 4 or 5 years, where you rarely meet in person. I mean, I think Talon, it was probably 4 years, right, before we finally met in person.
It really was. And now I can count the times we've seen each other. It's grown greater than one hand. So
yes,
we're making progress,
which is exciting. So I was just able to see Talon at SoDA's Global Summit in Copenhagen, and then see Talon again at Adobe Max in Miami just a couple weeks ago. Yeah, I'm repping the swag, so awesome. It's awesome to see you. And today our guest is going to be Tim Murphy. Tim is the founder and CEO of SoDA member agency Sideways. Tim has been a longtime friend and colleague in the SoDA community and runs just a brilliant brand creative studio. They do a lot of work in the hospitality and real estate space with a lot of cool, interesting luxury brands, and just super thrilled to welcome you today, Tim. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and it's nice to see you both today.
For sure. So for those of you on the call, I'm going to drop off in just a second, and I will be interacting in LinkedIn comments. So please feel free to introduce yourself in the comments, post questions along the way. I'll be there to monitor those and get them surfaced to Talon and Tim. And we're looking forward to a great conversation today.
Great. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
See you, Tom.
Tim, it's great to see you again.
You too.
I'm glad that we finally got this going. So I'm really excited to dig into this. The work that you and the team do is always just been phenomenal. I've been a big fan. But first, let's start off. Give us a little background. Kind of tell us about your journey, your kind of creative journey, like how you got to here, and the things that some of those key things that kind of helped you along the way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I used to think that my journey to agency ownership was really unique until I met a bunch of SoDA colleagues that shared a lot of similar stories and might even look too similar to me to be comfortable with. But I think a couple of things actually, part of the preparation for this meeting was talking about constraints and that's, I think, where my entrepreneurial part of my career started. Early in my career, I started really kind of at the salad days of the .com era, and during the .com bust, I was laid off and living in New York City, and it was really traumatic to my ego and to kind of my self-identity. And what it forced me to do is kind of hustle and figure out how to transfer my skills as an employee into sort of self-sustaining skills as a fledgling entrepreneur. So I ended up going and doing freelance work and designing and building websites for local businesses in the East Village at the time. I made like a little sales sheet that I walked around and sold to little shop owners and stuff. And I sold a few. And the price of the website that I was designing and building was the price of my rent. So I strategically said all I needed was one deal to happen, and I could live in New York City for one more month. And I strung a few of those together. Obviously, I didn't figure in the fact that I need to eat also and do some other, things. But that was like a really, I didn't know it at the time, but that experience actually really hardened this mindset in myself about adapting and pushing through adversity, whether it's financial or other types of adversity. And also it kind of gave me confidence that I can survive stuff. And so fast forward to when I started the firm is 15 years ago. I feel old saying that. I was also entering another period of like economic uncertainty. It was 2009. The global financial crisis was happening.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like unsure what the future was going to hold for me. And I felt most confident actually taking a step out on my own and pursuing my own future. And that was the beginning of Sideways, sort of a dollar and a dream, and more than anything, the ignorance and confidence to just take that leap of faith, and push forward. Those skills actually really prepared me for COVID as well. Those experiences that I had, were very useful during that, the early stages of COVID, and just trying to how to adapt to that new environment. But yeah, and then Sideways today, we have teams in 3 locations: New York, Los Angeles, and Guadalajara, Mexico. We're focused on real estate and hospitality and placemaking, and I'm excited to talk more about that.
Excellent. Well, I want to draw a finer point here on something that I think is a very kind of understated part of design, which is looking for those opportunities and having a very entrepreneurial mindset, right? We do this work so we can keep the lights on, whether that's paying our rent or whatever else. Like, this is a job, this is a business, right? Talk about that, kind of those skills that you developed over time and looking for those opportunities to apply your skills.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fun sort of door to open there. I'll sort of zoom backwards a little bit. I studied fine art in school, and that was where I thought my future as a sort of post grad would be pursuing creative expression. And I, was of a time and maybe era where that to me manifested in doing fine art. I didn't really have exposure to other creative fields. Like, my family doesn't have people that work in directly creative fields. And so the world I was exposed to growing up was more, I would describe as traditional, business and education and things of that nature. So after graduating college, I realized that the fine art world was not a good fit for me, or parts of it. The profession of it was not something that was exciting to me, and the realities of having to sort of live and pay for things on my own settled in quite rapidly. So that sort of pushed me to explore and try new things. I was also young and able to try things out. I started learning technology, Photoshop. I started using Photoshop professionally in like 98. I think yesterday when we were talking, I said I've been using it for 20 years. It's longer. But what I found in Photoshop actually was something that was really creatively very satisfying for me, and I was able to make money doing it. And the barrier for someone like me without really digital training was low, so I was able to experiment and be very creative and make the types of mistakes that were allowed at that time, and kind of foster that creative side of me that really needed to be satiated in order for me to feel good about myself as a human, and also self-sustaining as a young adult. So there was like an interesting convergence of creativity and professionalism that as an early like web designer and creative, I was afforded that because the tools were available, and they were kind of simple enough that it allowed someone with little experience to go and explore.
Yeah, that's amazing. I really appreciate how you wove in the story of tooling, into that. I think that's why I do what I do, because I see that sort of opportunity as tools to enable creatives, not just to express themselves, but to make money doing what they love to do. And I think that is, again, a very understated part of the conversation sometimes. So I appreciate you kind of drawing that finer point and kind of weaving that story in. So let's before we get to, and I really want to dig into some of the work that you have done with Sideways over the years, but do you remember a moment, maybe it was a project, where that opportunity around hospitality, around real estate, like opened up for you, where it became, it said, oh, we could make this a point of emphasis, for you and for Sideways as an agency?
Yeah, very, very clearly, actually. When early in the formation of the agency, I would describe us as a digital generalist agency.
Yeah.
And that was at a time where that was in demand, and just knowledge of digital media and web technologies and things like that were very marketable. And I should say and things were starting to also change at the same time, or they were in a state of constant change. I had a relationship that worked in hospitality, and we actually had lunch under no business pretense. It was just like a friendly lunch. And this light bulb went off in my head that I was like, oh, hotels. I've always had an interest in architecture. I've always felt like an imposter at hotels, and sort of that curiosity actually was intriguing to me about what I didn't know. And I was like, and there's a lot of hotels. They're all over the world. They've been around since kind of the beginning of time. I go to them often. Everybody I know has gone to a hotel at some point. So, and they seem to need the things that I do professionally. So that led to conversations with my friend's company. That led to my first hospitality client. And very shortly after that, a lot of the sort of focus became even more clear to me. And for a period of time, we had maintained some work outside of hospitality, but that always felt like an extension. And so as we started to really focus and develop our expertise, it just became more and more apparent that was our ground zero.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I really love that you can kind of identify that moment, because I think it's instructive in a way, and I think it illustrates like the potential for design, right? To see a problem that maybe is outside of your wheelhouse of experience kind of previously, but to look at it and say, well, I have something to contribute to that. I can use my skills and apply it here and elevate, that, and then build a strong business out of that. I think that's really instructive, I think, for a lot of people, especially just starting out.
Yeah. And, sometimes things look clearer in the rearview mirror than they might have felt at that time.
Yeah.
But the awareness that hospitality was a big market and something that I felt I could be successful creating value for as an industry, that part was very clear. One other detail that I'll just throw in there, I had experience as a younger person, sort of like in school and whatnot, working in hospitality, kind of front of house positions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those were fantastic skills that I still rely on today. If you want to learn customer service, like go work at a restaurant, go work at a coffee shop, and you will very quickly learn if you're, skilled in that department. And other themes that, I tap into often, the ideas of being customer service oriented, the ideas of like how to sort of create empathy in more transactional environments and sort of distinguish yourself through hospitality. These are themes that were kind of built into my profession very early on without me really knowing it. And it was at that lunch meeting where I started to feel like, oh, there's a place for all that skill that I didn't think had application in my digital media career. And I was like, oh, this is a fusion of those worlds that I felt was exciting to me and rewarding.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and that really resonates with me. I've always felt like I've been able to bring, my experiences, to bear, in applying my skill, as a designer. And part of the story of ending up at Adobe is that I just knew the tools deeper than a lot of my colleagues, and I, had a real frustration with tools, and I had a real idea of how my process could be better, through tools. And so, yeah, that definitely resonates. And I think that people should, I think, be looking for those kind of opportunities to apply those experiences, to the work that they do, or maybe find opportunities that they didn't see before.
Yeah, a lot of it, well, it won't make sense until it's happened, right?
Yeah, of course.
But I think that's also like, being opportunistic is important. I think as a I've always envied people that really have clarity. Like, I want to be a doctor or something like that. Like, I'm like, wow, you knew that so early and you committed, years, in some cases, decades to their life. I'm much more of like, meandering, sort of walker down, down a path of curiosity. But like having an open mind to what opportunities are available to you, and how to identify things that are satisfying to you. Now I work in like spreadsheets and scopes of work, and my profession is advanced well beyond pure creative, and I've actually found ways to be creatively satisfied with things like spreadsheets, and that might be really mundane, boring stuff.
Yeah. Tom had a great question here, and I'm going to just throw it out there because I think it's right in line with what we're speaking to, which is, okay, so you saw the opportunity and you were able to build on that. But Tom, I think, was wondering how you've wrestled with the question of specialization and kind of narrowing your focus and your kind of emphasis of the agency versus kind of a more broader approach, right? Or more segment approach. Like, we'll do work for this segment, but any of the work that comes down the pipe, or just more broadly taking kind of any sort of project. So again, like, how do you think about that and wrestle with that in your own practice?
I don't wrestle with it. That's how clear it is for us. We don't wrestle with it really at all. Sometimes I daydream about what it would be like to work for, a company that has no hospitality inclinations whatsoever. Or, these thoughts of like the grass is always greener, like, oh, they don't do it the way that maybe I don't like it does, that the industry that I service does, or, and those feelings like, wouldn't it be better on the other side? But the reality is, I use this analogy, and I don't know if I created it. So whoever might have created the analogy, I'm sorry, I can't give you credit. But, you wouldn't go, if you have a knee injury, you wouldn't go to a generalist doctor or practitioner to do surgery on your knee. You want the person that does the knee, surgery 1,000 times. And that's the level of expertise that we bring in. So it's like all that, foundational knowledge is really focused and delivered to our clients in a very tailored package. So there are things that, when I look back at that lunch meeting, when that turned into a business arrangement with them, there are things sometimes I cringe at, thinking, I'm like, oh, why did we propose that? And it's really because we didn't have developed expertise at that time. So we could be much more surgical in the approach and solutions that we recommend. Often that even allows us to get into some advisory positions with our clients and steer them away from potential mistakes that could be costly, and all coming from the position of expertise that we've honed over 15 years servicing that industry. In other, kind of practical terms, like I mentioned, like COVID, disruption earlier on. It was really dramatic for our industry. Sort of, that, like, the reasons why I started working with hospitality and real estate in the beginning, because it's so big and it's everywhere. He really thought that it was like kind of not only recession proof, but sort of just super durable, right? And then enters a pandemic, super disruptive to us. But our specialization, I think, really allowed us to rebound from that very rapidly. Had we been more of a generalist agency, I think we would have suffered a lot longer and a lot worse. So I don't know if that gets at the heart of that question, but it's not something that I grapple with. I am just very confident and comfortable with the worlds that we operate in. They also have, I have some natural interest in these areas. And I've only grown more interest in them. So when I walk around new cities, I see them differently. And that appetite for understanding how hospitality kind of connects people has only grown under this specialization.
Yeah. So rather than a stagnation, you really felt like you've been able to sort of mine, it's almost like greater depths of nuance and quality, and sort of, just continuing to build your practice and your skill set over time.
100%. And if anything, I get more excited the more specialized we get, because I actually see more opportunity with that specialization. And I have friends that have what I would describe again as like a generalist agency, and they're really successful. And I'm always like, wow, you guys get to kind of do it all. And when I'm feeling good, I am mature and comfortable enough to be like, that's working for them, but this works for me. Sometimes that could be a part that, it's more in a daydream scenario, but at the end of the day, I'm like, well, I do really know kind of my shop, my world.
Yeah. I love it. Let's dig into that a little bit now, and maybe get a little more into the weeds here. Talk about the role design plays in creating hospitality experiences. Talk about just some of the things that you think about and how you apply kind of your skills and your craft to the field of hospitality. Just talk about some of the parameters of that.
Yeah. Well, we tend to work, and we work with, just to clarify, hotels, restaurateurs, real estate developers, resorts, people that kind of have like some physical space that represents their brand. And so, but to give a little bit of narrower focus, talking about hotels, I think is something people generally understand pretty well. We work with, for the most part, two types of hotels. Where's my camera? Ones that don't exist yet. They're either being developed from the ground up or being, like a building transformation going into, but that's something that's considered like new, didn't exist yesterday. The other kind is what we call a brand and transformation. And that might be a hotel that maybe hasn't gone through a rebrand in a long time, and some of its brand standards aren't up to contemporary standards. And usually what that means is they're experiencing some type of pain as a business. That could be like underperforming. Maybe there's competition that's sort of moved them out of their market position. And they have identified that their brand is part of the reason why they need to reevaluate it, invest in that, and come back stronger. So with, with the hotels that we work with, our journey really actually starts at the end of the engagement. And this goes back to one of those very early conversations. It's actually I think my second client that I had in hospitality, where we did a brand and identity system for them. We built a whole digital campaign for them, digital marketing, website, full spectrum. And we finished that, and they were like, okay, great. Now we have another property in a very different market. And I was like, well, one was super urban and the other one was really tropical. And I was like, I failed to ask them what their future plans are for this brand to scale, or maybe not to scale. And so I made it a point to make sure that that never happens again, and that we're really thinking, trying to future-proof the brands that we create and that we work on. So that's the beginning. Is actually a bit of at the end. We have a workshop that we call the Future Picture, and that is designed to get our clients talking and articulating what their vision of success looks like. When we understand what success looks like, we can be even more surgical and precise about how we deliver solutions for them. So if it's one property that's going to be in a tropical place, that's great. Now we share that understanding. If it's going to be maybe a global brand that has properties urban, maybe tier 1, 2, and 3 markets across North America, maybe across Europe, we're going to have very different mindset in how we think about design, how we think about communications for that brand. So that becomes like a really important focus for us at the start of any engagement, and it really informs the design process as well. So we're not designing things that maybe don't translate to other markets.
Yeah. And what are you in applying the brand, kind of both from the digital realm and into the physical locations, and even tailoring it, to the needs and the expression of each of those sort of maybe disparate locations? How do you think about that? How do you think about design as a way to enhance someone's experience of coming not just to the property, but at the property as built into the environment, as built into the city or the culture kind of around that? Talk about that approach.
Yeah. Predominantly the brands that we work with are looking to tap into some local expression that's unique to that marketplace versus one that tries to deliver the same experience across their whole portfolio. So what I find is it kind of falls into 2 categories. There should be some universal standards that we look to deliver to all guests at all, and those are the things that unify the brand. It's sort of like the global standard. And then there's the things that distinguish that brand in a local environment. So those are, my team really understands the distinction between those 2 categories and what exists in that overarching realm and what needs to be delivered in that on-property experience for this one location. So, you and I in our preparation had talked a little bit about our work for Moxie, and that's a brand that has a pretty large global footprint. And our job is to localize that into individual markets and bring unique qualities that are only in that specific corner of the earth to that. And so that can be done through certain like food and beverage recommendations. Even we get into like scent design and visual aesthetic. I love
that.
Scent design is, if you didn't know this, I learned it somewhere at some point, but like scent is the most powerful memory trigger of all the 5 senses. So if you want to create a strong memory, wrap some scent around it. Right.
Very
Hopefully
true.
A good one. But so we'll get into those types of details to help express what that brand is and how to connect that with local culture.
Yeah, I really kind of love that approach. I think it showcases, I think, the depth of, in terms of expressing the brand, the sort of depth of thinking and the nuance there. Like we are often very visually biased, right? But there's sort of all these other ways in which a place, a moment in time, can be expressed, and the way a brand can utilize that to enhance an experience.
This is a topic that I think a lot about, where hospitality at its best is connecting a local and a traveler. And it's our job to try and synthesize the needs and wants of both. I'd read something, I think it was the CEO of Accor Hotels they're from Europe, and he said if we don't have a local in our properties, we've failed. And I've thought about that. I read it in some interview, and I was like, oh, that's really insightful, and that's stuck with me and kind of been woven into the work that we do. it is imperative that our locals feel that the projects that we work in have a spot for them. And that's where, the great experience of hotels kind of come into play, where you really get to interact with things that in an environment that's truly different from where you're coming from.
Yeah. Well, just to dig into that a little bit more, would love for you. You mentioned Moxie, and I've stayed at a couple of Moxies, and so I've both experienced Moxie as a brand. Like, I'm walking in and I'm sensitive to these things, but so there's the Moxie umbrella, right? There's Moxie's kind of vibe or their approach or their aesthetic, but then like I think the Flower District has probably been my favorite property of theirs to stay at, because I had stayed in the Flower District before, not at a Moxie, but that's usually where I stay when I come to New York. But when I walked into that Moxie in particular, there really was an expression of the neighborhood and its history as this very, scented, very lively, very colorful place. And so to talk about that, the approach, right? There's Moxie as a brand, as an expression, but then how did you root that property in New York, in the Flower District specifically? Because that's local, but that's really localized, to a specific neighborhood.
Yeah. So, for those of you that don't know, the Flower District of New York, it's I think one of the unsung heroes of the city that locals really know. And it's if you want, to experience a little, I don't know, it's just a total gem of unique business culture in New York. And I think that, it's gotten smaller over my lifetime. Even the fact that our property is right in the midst of it indicates that its walls are sort of shrinking in on itself. But when you walk down there, you're like, wow, this is really different. It feels very different from any other city in the States that I've been to. It does sort of evoke some feelings of other countries. It's very dense. There's a lot of hustle happening, and it's eclectic. You realize that the flower industry as a business category has a lot of dimension to it. And as somebody that never really thought about flowers maybe all that much, I was like, oh, you have your rose person here, and you have your fern person there, and you have your succulents over there. And I didn't really think about them as different categories. And so there's this really rich sensory experience that you have walking through that few blocks of commerce. And that was part of what we wanted to bring in and pack into our design system and design language for the hotel there. So sometimes when things are too obvious, we want to find maybe a little more nuanced twist on it. For this property, though, we really leaned into the floral nature of the property. And some of that, I think, also is there's other hotels in that market. And sort of mind-bogglingly, they didn't actually take advantage of the richness of all the things that happen right before you walk through the doors. So that was also part of our market distinction, was trying to own the Flower District as our home. And really bring that into the guest experience. And so, on property, there's a lot of flower themed experiences in the design and the guest experience.
Yeah. And I mean, I just really appreciate, that was probably, again, I think I stayed there very early on in that sort of coming to the Flower District. And it was the first time I had seen the expression, the branded expression, just go through to every detail, of the property, and the choices that were made by yourself and your team, the choices that were made by the interior designers, right? Like, there is a world that is being built, by that property to localize it in that very unique place in New York. And I just, again, it's probably why I stay at Moxie now, everywhere I go, just to see that expression and how it changes.
Yeah. So to give you a couple examples, we have another Moxie just a few blocks north. I think it's nine blocks north or something. And that's more attuned to Times Square, right? And so bright lights, big city, it's flashier, it's shinier. There's no real floral presentation there. That has a much more large scale sort of city center energy to it. It's a much bigger hotel, so everything is a little bit bigger. And that those decisions were intentional because that's what that property and that space kind of demanded. And some of the commonality between those two properties are the guest is kind of like you in that they're professional. They're often there on work. They might tack on an extra day or two during their stay, but so there's certain functional things that we know, like you probably going to do a Zoom call while they stay there. So we want to ensure that there's accommodations in the room and other areas of the property that are going to allow you to do that and feel, even if subtly, that this property understands your needs as a guest while you're staying there. So those are the thing that's pretty omnipresent across all Moxie locations, but then how it's packaged and wrapped up is what's really localized.
Yeah. I really kind of love, I think, what the story and the case study of Moxie is really showcasing from a depth and sort of a nuance perspective. An agency could come in and do Moxie's brand, but I think what you're talking about and looking for the opportunities to build out that story, to really localize that property in that space, again, just feels like you continue to sort of mine the depths of that. And, in terms of, world building and its role now in brand creation and hospitality experiences, what are those new opportunities you're seeing, both in terms of what the audience might be looking for or maybe even expecting? And how are you thinking about, again, continuing to sort of mine the depths of that, in offering up those services to your clients?
Yeah. I mean, my mind kind of ping pongs around all the different ways that could be explored and talked about. So I was actually thinking, I was looking at some of our exchange earlier, and back when we were first talking about this session, Flash for me personally was a way for me to take ideas and make them actually something that had value in them, right? Take a maybe abstract idea and turn them into a website or something like that. And so in a way that was like a small world, but it was the idea of, building a little microcosm of a world. Now with generative AI and some of the much more sophisticated or advanced creative tools that we have available to us, the idea of world building has really exploded in the last 18 months. So, and the effort and resources that it takes to go and create a world is, anybody with an idea and a computer can start to actually create their own universe. Maybe universe is the next phase. We're at the world phase right now. Universe is 2025. I don't know. But so world building is, something that we think about. I had thrown this out in a client presentation with one of my team members on the creative side, and she was like, "What are we doing with world building? Like, what do you mean?" And I was like, "I'm not totally sure, but we are going to figure that out." And so we have this project that we're working on in for a global hospitality group. That we have a specific project in Greece that's happening, and this project is in many ways couldn't be more different from Moxie in the worlds that we're building, but the depth and clarity of that world is shares that sort of richness, and so with that, what we're working to emulate right now is our clients' understanding of how things are done. From they're sort of a culinary personality, and so how food is actually the ultimate expression of hospitality, and how to do that in a resort environment. So food is at the sort of core of the hub there, and then building a whole world around that. So you start to get into what's travel like when you're going to a culinary resort. What is the sensory experience that you have? What are the senses that we need to really tap into to make that connection with the guest? And what are the things that we need to do digitally to attract the right type of guest that's going to appreciate it once they show up on property and be, have their mind blown with, wow, I thought it was going to be like this, and now it's actually 10 times that once I'm on property. So that's also world building for us, is really trying to immerse a guest into that environment. From a digital perspective, it's using things like generative creative tools to try and visualize what that is, and then ultimately pay that off when they get onto our property.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered the question.
No, you totally did. I find this fascinating because I think, to me, and again, I've been a huge fan of, narrative storytelling across all different types of media and properties. And I love your reference of Flash and Flash's capabilities to build out narratives, to establish a world. There's characters potentially in that world. There's, like I said, like sensory sort of experiences within that world, where they're unique to that sort of place, maybe even time. And, I was wondering, kind of on this, are you thinking about this world building from a narrative standpoint, or is it really sort of experiential, or are you kind of mixing the two?
Oh yeah, well, it's definitely narrative based and uses experience as a way to express that narrative.
Yeah.
And I think like Flash is something I think about a lot, because I'm old enough to have worked on it, and there was also a point with Flash that was kind of interesting, where it became more sophisticated than I was able to sort of follow with.
Yeah.
So that's where the tool became actually obstructive to me as a creative, and it became more about learning the depths of the tool more, so that I could get my simple idea out.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's a little bit of that right now with some of the AI tools that I work with, where they're a little hard for me to get my idea where I want it to be. And so so for me, it is like an assistive tool, or there are assistive tools to sort of nudge me along, but they actually don't really manifest the idea. I think they will soon. But I think about that often as, the idea has to be there to be applied to whatever it is, whether it's a photo or a video or a website or an email or any other type of media that we consume. The idea needs to be there and needs to connect to some type of story that we're looking to unpack.
Yeah. That I really appreciate you calling that out, because it's definitely, I think very deeply about product and tool experiences.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And you're 100% correct. I think there was a tipping point, and potentially in any tool, or even some tools more start out this way, when they're focused more on really the technology. And so the user ends up having to the creative has to bring so much knowledge to bear before just being able to express an idea. And I think that's where we see some of the biggest barriers, today. And I really liked your kind of challenge here, in a way of saying, as we bring on these new capabilities, new technologies, how can it really allow creatives to express their ideas without a lot of that overhead in place, like having to understand the technology and what it's capable of, rather than that technology is being applied to the outcome you're looking to express, and helping sort of, accelerate your path towards that expression.
Yeah, I think especially in like image creation in particular, the emphasis on knowledge, on tool expertise versus creative expertise is sort of off, at least for me, because I'm not an expert in AI, tools per se. I use them probably as much as anybody, but I haven't crossed that divide of expertise yet. But I'm excited for how that might assist me and allow me as a creative to be more creative and have the tool then just support that even further than it is now. And there's some areas too, like that are quite intuitive and just sort of like take the idea and like make it happen. I'm talking a little more holistically on those.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Quickly, because I want to make sure we didn't lose this thread, but Ella in the chat had a question from before, and just to clarify, you talked about the kind of worksheet that you use when you're sort of starting those initial conversations with brands and really establishing or prompting kind of what their future aspirations are or could be. Maybe just sort of give to kind of bring that, kind of clarify that, and the process of of helping a client kind of with those future aspirations, kind of getting them out there.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Ella. So it's actually a workshop that we use, that we developed to support our clients. It's our first point of departure at the beginning of an engagement with a new client. We call it the future picture. And the future picture, it's just that the attempt to sort of brand it is, it's a snapshot of what success looks like for our clients. Often, they have these ideas for sometimes many years. The project that I'm working on right now in Greece, our client has been working on this project for over 30 years, assembling this property. So he's had this idea for quite some time, and it hadn't really been shared publicly with his team or with us as an agency that he's engaged. So this workshop is a format for us. It's all dialogue based. So we just talk with them. I found that's the best way to get our clients, sharing that vision is through dialogue. We, as a hospitality focused agency, also, I think that's, we try and bring hospitality into how we run our workshops and engagements. So we often do it live in person, and it's structured in that we have like 6 different chapters that we go through, but it's often, there's an element of, adapting on the fly based on things that the client expresses. And, some of it is like trying to pull at the threads of ideas that they may be sharing with us. And for our clients, the feedback that I've had is it can be very cathartic for them to just share these big ideas that they've had. For our clients' teams, it allows them to get harmonized across their different departments or disciplines and understand, okay, this is the vision. We now all have clarity on what it is, and share language around how to articulate that. And then, like I stated earlier, for us, I mean, it's gold, because we have an understanding of what their big vision is. Our engagement might be a little piece of that journey, but now we have great context as to how we fit in and things that we might need to address going forward. Mm-hmm. So I hope that gives you enough clarity. I'm happy to chat with you. You can even hit me up on LinkedIn if you want to talk more about it.
Are there any like activities or processes that you do in those kind of future focused sort of sessions? Like anything you can share real quick?
Yeah, I mean, so actually one of the things that I think is quite fun, we have like this card that we at the beginning hand out to our clients. It's called our Fears, Wants, and Desires card. And they can take as many as they want, and they write down one fear, want, or desire on each card. We collect those different statements, and we'll go through them with the team. Part of that is an investigation by us to understand, hey, what are the actual team members worried about that might prevent us from being successful? And it allows us to also start to address some of those things, or build, an awareness like, hey, maybe so-and-so doesn't have the time or resources to commit to this. So what do we do if that's the case? We did a large one for a large entertainment client of ours a couple years ago, and at the end of our engagement, we resurfaced those cards to go through them, and we made a real intentional point to try and address them as we were working through our engagement. That was maybe an 18-month engagement with them, and it was quite fun to look back at that and show how maybe some of those were well stated at the beginning of the engagement, and some maybe didn't really matter because we were able to navigate around them. Mm-hmm. So that's a fun one.
Thanks for getting into that a little bit more, because I think in creating an experience for the client, it's important for you to learn more information, and I think that's one of the most valuable things for the designer. The more information we have, I think the better we can address the needs, or and find a great solution for all parties involved. But I like that kind of ways in which it actually helps the client kind of understand their own mind in a way, and helps them maybe express ideas that maybe they had sort of tucked away in their brain, but they had never sort of fully expressed them and sort of looked at them under the light of day, as it were. So I really love those kind of activities.
Yeah, people always have those things tucked away. So I think part of our job is to understand them. We don't need to know all of them, but we need to know that they're there.
Yeah.
I think that's and that allows us to I think approach things with, I used the word empathy before. I think that's a sometimes overused but underutilized word. As a hospitality agency, that's something that we think a lot about, and if we understand those fears and wants and desires of our clients, it just allows us to be a better partner for them and more of a trusted advisor.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and the client feeling heard, right? And that's much easier than to make a connection with them on the potential solutions that you're proposing and coming up with. And I think everyone feels a little more satisfied at the end due to that.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to distinguish yourself in a business environment, start talking about people's fears, wants, and desires. And even if your role might be seemingly very removed from those things that they're sharing with you, you sort of enter into a realm that it has a deeper connection with them, and that can be really satisfying. If nothing else, you could potentially understand how people are interacting with you, and if that's a good fit, or how you can reshape that relationship into something that's more satisfying for you personally. So it can be really powerful and open a lot of opportunities for you as an individual, as a professional. I think they're also just good human traits and practices.
Yeah, I agree. Well, one thing I wanted to connect with you on, because this was something that you and I think really, really connected on, which is the role of constraints and the value of constraints in our work. And this, usually at the end here, I like to talk about the things that drive us as creatives and keep us inspired. But you and I kind of got talking about this one the other day, and I wanted you to sort of like take the floor, talk about the role that constraints play in your creative practice and in your role in running Sideways, and how it inspires you.
Yeah. Constraints are something everybody's confronted with. And I think the older that I get, the more comfortable and almost I seek out constraints, and actually enjoy the focus that they can allow me to have personally and professionally. So when we were talking about this, there's this good example I have where I think we've been talking about like these little light bulbs on this call, but I had this light bulb when I was in school, and I took a design class, which is different from fine art class where they let you do kind of whatever you want. Design was all about like, now, you have to play by some rules. And I was not looking forward to this class, and my initial take on it was not super positive. And we had to do some creative work where we only use ink, black ink on white paper. And at first I was like really frustrated by the limitations, because I didn't feel like that was not my realm. And I ended up doing, I think, some of my best work in school, because it liberated the choices that were sort of creating noise in my work were removed, and it allowed me to get really clear and focused on what I was actually trying to do. And I didn't really know that. That's like one of those rear view mirror learnings that it was decades later that I was like, oh, that's why that felt good. It was because there were certain constraints there that allowed me to actually express something in a much deeper way, focus much more deeply. So fast forward to like how that's applied today. I mean, I love the idea of having charrettes that are fast. Sometimes time is not your friend. And I like the challenge of having to move swiftly and make decisions on the fly, and be confident that that I'm skilled enough and capable enough and set up for success that those decisions will land. One last sort of tangent on that. I read something about Virgil Abloh and his creative process, and he had done like a big creative presentation to his leadership team, and he got on a plane and just immediately started doing the next season, just drawing one after the other. And I was like, oh, I love that momentum. So his constraints were probably, many, but he used like his air travel and the fact that he just had this meeting, he had all this stuff going on in his mind, and just riffed and just created this whole new season. I think about that because I'm like, wow, he took constraints and just kind of blew the doors off of them. And I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah. I mean, we're lucky, I think, sometimes to, in a way to approach a project and have it have natural constraints, time, resources, right? All those things. But then definitely something that I've tried to focus on in my personal practice is having like almost self-applying some of those, limitations or constraints, right? Not limitations, but constraints, like you were saying, with the sort of getting on the plane and just diving right into that process and using the constraints of the plane ride to get that creative energy, to almost free you up, to sort of quiet, all the noise and all the anxieties that might be encroaching on you in your daily work.
Yeah, air travel could be a really good place for that.
Totally.
Put yourself in a little can in the air, and constraints. There you go.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, and even like when I was living in New York, I had a small kind of home, and I still wanted to create artwork, and so I had to figure out how do I actually use this small space to create my ideas and still get that that satisfaction of the fine art process for me. Now my constraints are more time related, where I have a 5-year-old and a profession and other obligations that are always trying to take my time, and how do I still find a way to be creative within those different constraints. So so I think, like, as creatives, as entrepreneurs or creative professionals, whatever field you might work in, it's trying to embrace those limitations and turn them into your superpower and maximize them. And for me, at least, that's allowed me to be much more satisfied with the work that I'm producing, if I'm able to identify that it's under certain constraints and let that kind of guide my process.
Well, that is a perfect note to end on, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And for digging into this. I looking forward to my next stay at the properties you and your team have worked on, and I will be keeping an eye out for that narrative world building that goes into that.
We'll try and line one up. Yeah, we'll try and line one up in the Greece location for
There you go. Perfect. There you go. I love it.
I like that a lot, and I'm coming to New York in 2 weeks, Tim. So I'm immediately checking out the Moxie in Chelsea.
I highly recommend it. I always stay there when I go now.
Yeah. Okay.
I like how Tom chimes in at the end to say, "I'm going to be there. I'm coming too."
That's why I do these things, just to secure the invite.
There you go.
Thank you guys for a great conversation. And I really loved, Tim, your thoughts on specialization early in the conversation. I think that's, I think we sometimes falsely, you've heard this in the SoDA world a lot, but there's this, this balance of, like, if you specialize too much, you're closing yourself off actually to opportunity. And, and the reality is that's not the case. And, talking, your analogy of a knee surgeon, it's spot on. We need to be experts at what we do. And I think we're sometimes unwilling to, that's a constraint actually that you put on yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's been amazing to watch you kind of grow the business and thrive in that model. I also just love, just as another observation, I loved, You talked about the power of scent, and I don't know if you remember when we were at the Faena Hotel in 2017,
Of course,
when
yeah.
that first opened. And I mean, that scent, I don't know what it was, but I still think of it to this day.
Yeah.
8 years later. I mean, it was incredible. And I'm particularly struck by, I love how a lot of our members, who started in the digital realm, now are 10, 15, even 20 years in, that a lot of you and our colleagues are moving into sort of like multi-sensorial, tactile design in lots of ways. Still can be very digitally centric in lots of ways, but so many of our practices, which sort of started very specialized in pixels, has now started to like grow out into the physical world and in all sorts of capacities. And I think that that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a blurring the lines between digital and analog that's only going to continue to get more and more blurred. So,
Yeah.
so that to me is kind of the future. Is like how do we actually create more blurriness there so that those worlds don't feel different and distinctive.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you both for
Yeah.
the incredible conversation today. We appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us today. Archived on the Creative Cloud page on LinkedIn, so you can always go back and check out the recording. Also, if you enjoyed the session, you can join us again on December 12th. We will have Ben Langsfeld, the Chief Design Officer from Buck, joining us in just a couple weeks for our final session of the year. So you can look on LinkedIn and in Adobe's Creative Cloud events for more details on that in the next couple days. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great day, afternoon, evening, wherever you called in from. We'll see you soon.